Darkness falls in Delhi. The cool of the evening offers a chance to cruise the streets for old and young. But hiding in the shadows, Surinder Koli, a man whose mind is full of the images of children. Children that he had slaughtered.
This was a man who came from one world and left for another. And if that wasn't difficult enough, he found that the world he entered was full of depravity.
As they had ventured onto the streets, the unsuspecting were wide-eyed with excitement, oblivious to the threat posed by Surinder Koli.
He'd lure the children back to the bungalow with sweets, with toffees, with offers of chocolate.
Over 2 years, 19 were to disappear. Koli went unsuspected as parents accused police of indifference to their plight.
This is every parent's worst nightmare. Your child goes missing. You don't know where they are, but worse than that, it seems that no one's listening.
Did one of India's worst serial killers stand out from the crowd? Anything but. Even when confessing, his voice calm, unemotional, normal.
और इसका मैंने बाजू और ये सीने का एक पीस भी खाया था.
Could anyone get inside the mind of a serial killer? In 2005, 2 girls went missing from an area of Delhi. The neighborhood, originally a village called Nithari, is one where poorer people do what they can to make ends meet. Some, like the Lal family, serve the growing numbers of middle-class professionals by taking in their laundry. One of the jobs given to Jyoti Lal, the family's oldest daughter, was to deliver the freshly cleaned and pressed linen to customers. One day, she became yet another to simply disappear.
तो मैं कहा अभी पकड़ के शादी ले जाएगा कोई तो कहीं कोई मिल ही जाएगा, लेकिन वो पकड़ के क्या लगा, तो पकड़ के कोठी में मार दिया तो कहाँ पता लगेगा बाहर में.
From a parent's perspective, it's a moment not just of utter panic, but of huge vulnerability. What do? Your child's gone missing. You can't find it. People aren't really taking heed. So how impotent, how frantically worried, how guilty must you feel?
Had she become the latest victim of Surinder Koli, a man who began life in a tiny, remote village? There, he learned how to butcher.
He used to help his father. He used to skin them, cut the parts of the body of the animal, and then he will remove the flesh from the bones and sell that.
One day, hundreds of miles away in a giant suburb called Noida, he would use those skills to dissect the bodies of children.
There wasn't one victim, there were many. Every second parent, not only in that sector, from whole of Noida.
What makes Surinder Koli even more horrifying? He was a cannibal, eating the organs of some of his victims. The trigger?
Koli was seeing highly sexualized behavior, probably for the first time in his rather sheltered life.
Surrounded by sex, he was unable to do anything about it. With older women, he was impotent.
He had a sexual deviancy that made him perhaps unable to perform with women his own age.
Nobody knew of the turmoil developing in the mind of Surinder Koli, who, by 2005, was killing at a rate of 1 child a month. Koli selected victims at random. He showed no emotion, no mercy, as he cut up their bodies.
It was a gruesome murder. It was the brutal murder that ever I heard about it. It was worse than any other incident that I covered.
As the grotesque series of murders came to light, the questions. What had shaped the mind of a man who killed 19 times in just 2 years? Koli was moulded in 2 very different worlds, New and Old India, urban and rural.
This is somebody who's grown up in the foothills of the Himalayas, a very, very different place to where he is now in the middle of Delhi. Different in terms of how people speak to each other, what they expect of each other, different in terms of the sights, the smells, the cultural norms, the social norms.
It's a hard world if you're poor, and most people are. Just getting through the day is quite a challenge.
So this is somebody who is, for all intents and purposes, trying to take on a new persona, trying to find his way in this new part of the world.
Culturally, northern India couldn't be more different to the urban areas. Wander out of your village, you could be eaten by tigers, leopards. There was no internet, there was no TV. Suddenly this boy was thrown into the dazzle of Delhi.
A key ingredient in the events which are to follow Koli's move to the city is social class.
He comes from a social caste in India called the Untouchables. Now, very sadly, this is seen as a social group that is so below everybody else, that they're apart from the norm, that they shouldn't be interacted with, that they should do the most menial jobs, the jobs that no one wants to do. And this is a young man that clearly is trying to shake that off somehow. This is something that he's aware of, but clearly isn't happy with. He wants to move forward. He wants to do things that other people do.
Serial killers seldom stick out in the crowd. But go back to Koli's childhood and some unsettling signs do appear.
The person is introverted, not very good in studies, and he's not very sociable, have very limited social interactions, limited financial resources, limited experiences, and he did not have lots of warmth because he was not close to his family. He didn't have many friends at all.
An introvert with few friends. Hardly enough to explain what made Surinder Koli a serial killer. It was what happened next which tells more about the shaping of his mind. When he reached 13, Surinder left for the urban sophistication of one of the world's fastest growing economies. Delhi, a 450-kilometre train ride away. It was some culture shock. In the city, Koli eventually got a job as a servant in bungalow D5 in the rapidly modernising Noida.
He was staying alone as a domestic help in this particular household, and his family was away in the village.
He would cook, clean and do odd jobs for Monandir Panda Singh, a well-travelled businessman, a man who would introduce his young assistant to a very different world from the one he was used to, a world of networking, parties, a very adult world. Two very different men, Koli, the poor boy from the sticks, and his very worldly boss.
Panda was a player. He liked to be connected with the business elite, the political elite of the city. He held parties and he liked to bring girls back for sex.
So the country boy was not just encountering the pace and explosion of activity in the big city, he was encountering some of the truly dreadful things that take place there as well.
Panda, the sophisticated businessman with the big house, Koli's de facto life mentor, was setting a very bad example.
Because his employer is seen as someone of a higher caste, as someone of more means, as someone of more respect, it's perhaps even making it something to look up to, something admirable.
So the developing picture of Surinder Koli had taken a sordid and significant turn for the worse. The once naive country boy would welcome prostitutes into the home of his rich boss. At the same time, a macabre number count of missing children had begun. 2 had disappeared, and now Jyoti, the laundryman's daughter, was missing. Before he struck again, could anyone uncover what was going on inside the mind of a serial killer? By spring 2005, Surinder Koli had lured at least 2 children to their deaths in bungalow D5. Police simply refused to take seriously the stories of young ones disappearing.
This was happening in the poorer parts of Delhi. Children were disappearing, sometimes weekly, and there were cries of despair from parents who were going looking for these missing children. It was horrifying.
Amongst those missing was the daughter of Jabu Lal. Jyoti Lal was 10 when she set off to deliver laundry. Amongst the homes she would visit, bungalow D5, just across the street.
छत पे खड़ा होता था, कभी गेट पकड़ के खड़ा रहता था, वो भी कहीं जाता ही नहीं था। और अक्सर करके जब हम कभी तक ज़्यादातर गए तो जो है नौकर गेट पे भी खड़ा हो या कहीं जैसा तो देखो कोली जो है पंडित ये अपने गार्डन में बैठा होता था।
With news circulating of children disappearing, should the Lal family have been more careful? Jyoti more on her guard.
There's nothing to suggest that Jyoti would have herself felt uncomfortable doing this. Young children look to their parents as sort of barometers to gauge whether they should be worried or not. Given that her parents were comfortable with her doing this route that she'd done many times before, there's nothing to suggest that Jyoti wouldn't have seen this as just any other day.
Why did nobody suspect Koli? Because he simply blended into the crowd. Nobody to worry about.
Surinder Koli was not somebody you would expect to be afraid of. He was slight in build, a very diligent boy, altogether rather unremarkable.
रोज अब काले शीशे की गाड़ी आती थी, डॉक्टर आते थे, लेकिन ये नहीं पता बोलने चालने में बहुत अच्छा से बोलता था, इसलिए तो भी कोई साबित नहीं करा।
Jyoti Lal never came back from her laundry drop.
We still don't know what happened. She just never came home.
She had simply disappeared in the hustle and bustle of a busy working afternoon. And nobody had even noticed that she had walked through the neighbourhood.
The way that this little girl had disappeared, it was almost as if she'd been photoshopped out of her family, out of her society, out of her surroundings. She was just gone. 1 minute there, 1 minute not. And actually, I think the most difficult thing when you look at this case is that there was a sense of, well, you know, these things happen. What are you going to do? Maybe you didn't take good care of her. So these people, this family, wasn't just faced with the pain and the anguish of not knowing where their child was, but also with the minimization of this enormous event by those around them, kind of just saying, you know what, you should have taken better care of her.
Jyoti's parents ran from house to house, including bungalow D5, where Koli opened the gate.
अच्छा से बोलने में साबित नहीं किया, ये कभी कहीं ही पता लगा। हमने अपनी लड़की के बारे में ये पूछा, अरे भाई यहाँ तुम लोग खड़े, तुम ज़्यादातर खड़ा रहता, भाई यहाँ कोई लड़की को भाई पकड़ के तो नहीं ले गया है, ज़रा कोई ध्यान रखना, आप कोई मिल जाए तो ध्यान रखना, हम तुझे 50,000 रुपये देंगे, खाली नाम नहीं आने देंगे, बता देना तो फला आदमी ले गया है, उसका थोड़ा पता लगाओ। तो कहने लगा ठीक है, अरे अब कहाँ मिलेगी, कैसे मिलेगी, ऐसे ऐसे करके चल जाता था।
Must be so hard to imagine what Mr. Lal would have been going through. This is a man who ran his backstreet laundry like most kids. His children helped him out with it as they got older, delivering fresh laundry. This is somebody that life was based on routine and expectations of who he was supposed to be, what would happen to his children, and then this happens.
10 साल की थी, मैं 1 साल 7 महीने ढूंढाई की, उसके बाद में ये केस खुला।
Still, local police simply did not begin an investigation.
Whether because the family were reporting were poor or whether the police actually believed that this child had run away, the truth is that absolutely nothing was done. No searches, nothing. The terrible thing was that this child was on the streets, walking the streets 1 minute, and the next minute she was gone.
It was the work of Surinder Koli. By now the neighbourhood was raw with pain, parents bewildered by events. None knew what Koli was doing, snatching children, killing them, and more.
3 तो हमारे से पहले खो चुके थे, 3 के जानकारी में इसी लाइन से खोए हुए थे। एक रीपा हंटर की लड़की, नील हल्दर की लड़की, एक उसकी देखो, और एक है उसका दुर्गा प्रसाद, उसकी लड़की, 2-3 और एक पायल, ये 3 तो यहाँ खोई है। उसके 3-4 खोने के बाद में हमारी लड़की खोई है। तो यही आते थे, सब कहते थे यहीं तक हमारी लड़की आई, यहीं से नहीं पता लगा, यहीं तक देखा गया, उसके बाद नहीं पता लगा। आखिर जो फिर हमने कहा था यहाँ से जैसे आते थे पूछने, भैया देखा क्या? मैंने कहा मैंने तो नहीं देखा। आखिर हाल में वो 3-4 के नंबर बाद में हमारे ही आ गया।
The notion of being a parent's worst nightmare, it's often said, is not an understatement. It is a nightmare. To have a child disappear is horrific and terrible and hugely painful, and you're also left with the pain of not knowing what happened. What could I have done differently?
In a bitter irony, when a girl goes missing in parts of India, it does not necessarily follow that she's been killed.
It's a horrendous fact of life in India, but children are actually snatched for the sex trade. For the family, though, it meant a little bit of hope because maybe she wasn't dead.
And as the weeks and months passed, this bungalow seemed to be at the centre of the mystery.
Despite the traumas and tragedies developing all around, girls would still be shipped into parties at Bungalow D5 for the amusement of Monandia Panda and his friends. Koli would watch.
One of the very important factors is that probably he had lot of sexual impulses which he was getting through the environment, because seeing his boss who had lot of extramarital relationship.
Bungalow D5, Koli's now exposed to things that he probably couldn't have imagined in his wildest dreams. He's exposed to sex parties. This is a young man trying to make sense of this new world within the context of what he's seeing around him.
So that was one thing which was, he found that in the environment there were a lot of sexual stimulation was there and he was not able to gratify.
Panda was not always at home. It meant that throughout this time, Koli spent a lot of time alone.
Panda Singh, Koli's boss, had a lot of overseas business interests, and he was often away from home, places like China, Australia, Canada, United States, and very often Koli would be left in the house alone.
Can you imagine? You're given the keys to the mansion, you've got the run of it, you're a poor boy from the sticks. What would you do?
So Koli had time in his hands and nobody to see what he got up to. He was a very different person from the rustic who had left for Delhi 20 years ago.
Surinder at this point is living in a very paradoxical world. On the one hand, he's being surrounded by sort of this decadence and opulence, these sex parties, women in amazing dresses, a lot of money. He's not partaking of this, so he's very much a voyeur. He sits back and he watches.
In the midst of the child snatching, the murder, the sex acts, and then the butchering of children's bodies, Koli would return regularly to his rural roots. By now, back in his home district of Almora, deep in the countryside, he had a wife. There, he had conquered his impotence, fathered 2 children.
Then he'll go back home and he'll be in the fields and, looking at women picking crops and taking care of kids, a huge juxtaposition between the two. This is someone who's trying to figure out into which world he belongs, because he's actually immersed in both, but actually not partaking in either. He's a watcher in one, and he feels like a stranger from where he used to be in the other.
After a weekend at home, Koli would journey back to the city. Each month, another child would go missing. By May 2006, the number count was 10. Most of the disappearances occurred in the same neighbourhood, but the police were still doing nothing. Koli was never interviewed, not suspected, but then nobody was.
There was a systematic failure of the authorities. By now it's 2006 and 10 children, 10 boys and girls have just disappeared. The police did nothing. They interviewed nobody. They didn't warn parents to keep their children off the streets. Nothing happened.
After yet another disappearance, it took a call to a journalist to prick the conscience of the local authorities.
One of the family members, a brother of one of the girl who was killed in this incident, Rajesh, he contacted me as a journalist. He felt somewhere that if it goes to media, if it is being reported, probably police and investigators will come out and help him. That was the hope that he had.
It was a forlorn hope. Despite all of the disappearances happening around Bungalow D5, neither Panda Singh nor Surinder Koli were spoken to by local police.
Police were coming out with all wrong kinds of theories also, since the girl in concern, Rajesh's sister, she was not a minor. They came out with different stories that probably the girl has run away.
Jyoti Lal's parents returned to the bungalow regularly, often seeing Koli.
गेट पे खड़ा थे, मनिंदर गेट पे खड़े थे, बोले बाबूजी इधर जो लड़की आई थी क्या? बोले नहीं, यहाँ तो नहीं आई है। 10 बार गई
पंडेर से भी पूछा,
गेट पे खड़े बार जाए घूमने, कहा बाबूजी आई है क्या लड़की? नहीं, यहाँ तो नहीं आई है, यहाँ तो नहीं आई, ऐसे बोले। वहाँ गार्डन में बैठा 10 बार पूछे जाके मनिंदर।
The level of despair on the streets ran deep. As time passed, another 2 children snatched. By mid-2006, the number count of missing children ran to 18, and still no one attempting to discover what was going on inside the mind of Surinder Koli. How many more would he snatch? How many more would he kill? Nithari's infrastructure is bursting at the seams, and over the 2 years of 2005 and 2006, these drains finally began to give up the ugly truths and dark secrets about the lives of some of its citizens. Surinder Koli and his boss Panda Singh were at home late in 2006 when the police knocked on the door. A teenage girl called Payal had gone missing and had last been seen entering Bungalow D5. Both men denied any knowledge of the girl. The next day, a fearsomely hot one, locals detected an overwhelming stench from somewhere near the bungalow. Thinking it may have been a dead animal, they probed the drains. They were to make a grotesque discovery.
Huge drain, and there were bones floating in the water. Bones of children.
As police descended on the scene, more skeletal remains were uncovered. Surinder Koli and Manindya Panda were arrested. There were near riots against the actions of local police, who'd done nothing as 19 children, mostly girls, but with some boys, had gone missing.
The area around Bungalow D5 was seething with anger. People were furious because they didn't believe that the rich Pandya could possibly be innocent, and they thought that the police had allowed Koli to get away with what he did because the children, the victims, were untouchables.
The case was handed to the National Police, the CBI. Both Koli and Panda were kept in custody and questioned. Hardened detectives like Arun Kumar were as sickened as the rest of India.
Naturally, a human being, it affects you after you handle the case also. It's very difficult to switch off, and that gives you some sort of very sick and depressing feeling that what is happening in the society, and the black aspect of, the dark aspect of the human behavior naturally disturbs you.
Detectives worked on the theory that both Koli and his boss were responsible, but what could have been the motive? An appalling trade has emerged in India in recent years. Around the time of Koli's arrest, police had become aware of backstreet clinics with a demand for organs. No questions asked about where they had come from.
At first, they suspected that organ trafficking might have been the motive, but that didn't really make sense because so many of the organs had been discarded in the drains. Then they wondered if child pornography might have been the motivating factor.
There were more questions. Chiefly, was it one man or both? And could it really all be true? Neither man had confessed.
So heinous were these crimes, so so unbelievable that actually there was a huge sense of confusion when the investigators began to accumulate more and more information. They were confused about, what was this Koli? Was this Panda? Was this girls and boys? Was there sex before? Was it after? Are we getting this right? There was a real sense of disbelief about, I think, the proportion as well as the violence. This was 19 kids that had gone through this.
He's a very simple person from hills. Normally the hill people are very simple people. That too from a poor background, doing a household job, obeying the instructions, not raising voice, not asking questions. So I will find him a very, very, very simple person. And that's why everybody was not believing that such a simple person can commit so many horrendous murders under one roof from last 2 years.
So, early theories suggested to police that Koli had not been a sole serial killer, if he'd been one at all. His boss was, however, definitely in the frame.
The reason that they thought it was Pandya was because he was rich. He was used to buying the company of women.
Detectives who interviewed Koli spoke of being wrong-footed by his nature. He seemed a simple and straightforward character, and there was no suggestion of the monstrosity of his criminal behaviour, and that made their job even more difficult.
Psychologists were drafted in to examine both men. The doctors, like everyone else, thought Koli the junior partner at worst. Panda was the likely leader.
Panda would have been the main suspect.
He denied any knowledge of what had been going on. Detectives initially didn't believe him, but in trying to find evidence against him, they actually stumbled across evidence that would exonerate him.
There was phone records to show that he wasn't even in the country when some of these killings took place.
It could not have been Panda. Still, the Indian justice system couldn't accept it.
One of the courts hearing the initial evidence was led by a woman judge, and she simply couldn't believe that it wasn't Pandya. But the truth is that the evidence just simply didn't support that argument.
Koli was emerging as solely responsible for one of the worst crimes in Indian history. His boss, Panda, could not have been a killer. Often, he'd been away, in Australia most of the time, on business. It was now, as detectives probed Koli, that forensic pathologists began to notice some evidence which suggested yet another grisly twist to the horror of Nithari village.
The talk was also that Surinder Koli is a cannibal, which was again a very shocking thing for us, a person who's cannibal, a person who's psychopath.
Those living in Nithari, still grieving and reeling from the murder of 19 children, now had another horrific possibility to consider. Just how far had Koli gone in his depravity? Could it be true? Was he a cannibal? The case against Surinder Koli was to take a remarkable turn. The Indian courts allowed him to be given a relaxant when under interrogation by a psychologist. The tactic succeeded. He had said nothing over weeks of interviews. Now he confessed, not just to the murders, but to the way he had disposed of the bodies. His interviewer sat incredulous as Koli revealed what he had done.
I was very appalled to hear about the ghastly way in which the murder was taken place, and then how he behaved with those, and how he hid the bodies, and then how he had tried to cut them also into pieces.
Koli's childhood, spent helping his father, a butcher, cut up the bodies of animals, had provided him with perfect training in the job of dissecting a torso. After killing his victims, that is precisely what he had done.
It was actually a very fine work that he had done with the bodies, the way he would cut them and make it into small pieces which no other person could have been able to do.
The confession evidence alone would still not be enough to convict Koli. Detectives needed more, and they got it.
Then we started searching for other forensic evidence in the house, and we found a lot of blood at the first floor of the house. That was a bathroom being used by Koli.
Now interviewed by police alone, Koli crumbled. He described in minute detail what he'd done, murder by murder. He told the complete story.
He confessed that whenever he killed a person, he took the body up the stairs, kept it there, and when there was nobody in the house, then he used to chop that body in various parts, put the various organs in a bag and dispose of in a nala in front of the house in the early morning or the night time. So that was corroborated by the lot of blood stains and at the floor, at the wall, and all those things.
As Koli began to open up, his depravity stunned the nation.
He'd lure the children back to the bungalow with sweets, with toffees, with offers of chocolate, that kind of thing.
He strangled the children with their headscarves, performed sex acts on their bodies, and then cut them to pieces. And during his confession, the revelation nobody wanted to hear, he confirmed it. He had eaten body parts.
In some of the cases, he said that yes, and mostly he said that he basically used to allure the female child, but in one or two cases, he mistook a boy for a girl, called him, and then he didn't do sex with him, but when he was cutting the body, he ate the raw heart of that particular boy.
After his confession, Koli returned to the behaviour of his younger country days. Quiet, polite, helpful. He even agreed to speak to journalists.
I met him in Dasna prison with his lawyer after a due process which was followed, and he was very much normal. Very soft-spoken person. He hardly said anything. Whatever I asked him, his answer used to be in one-liner or two words.
And what was the truth about what India had been hearing, that Koli was a cannibal?
I just asked him, did you try to eat a human part of a child? Then he said yes. I asked him, why did you eat? Then he just answered that I had an urge. That's exactly was surprising for us, that a person who looks normal, who sounded normal, yet he got into such an activity. And he was he had regret in his, there was some amount of remorse in him. The guilt was there, it was seen on his face for whatever happened. But probably he was in a trance, that he was not able to understand why it happened, whatever happened. And now when he's feeling it, that guilt was coming out on his face. And that is what probably made him admit or confess everything before the investigators also.
The recorded confession was released to the world. India could hear the voice of the simple country boy who had turned into the monster of a city.
लड़की सेक्टर 30 की तरफ से 31 निठारी की तरफ आ रही थी, इसका नाम फोटो दिखाने पे और बाद में पता चला पुलिस के जरिए इसका नाम डिम्पा है, तो इसको मैंने काम के लिए बुला लिया अंदर। इसको अंदर लाते ही मैंने इसको बोला कि सामने से मतलब जो है अभी मैडम आ रही, मैं पैसे की बात करवा देता हूँ। और जैसे ये उधर को देख रही थी, मैंने पीछे से इसी के चुने से इसका गला दबा करके और इसको बेहोश कर दिया। उसके बाद इसके साथ सेक्स करने का कोशिश किया और सेक्स करने का कोशिश किया, थोड़ी देर सेक्स करने की कोशिश करने के बाद उसके बाद जब सेक्स नहीं हो पाया मेरे से, मैंने गला दबा करके इसको मार दिया उसके चुने से।
So the confession was not a problem. He was coming with all the stories. Once somebody once he sure that his crime have been detected, then he will be very cooperative.
बिल्कुल मन में इसी तरह का प्रेशर बना था कि इसको काट के खाऊं करके। अच्छा। तो उसके बाद मैं इसको तुरंत ऊपर बाथरूम में लेके गया। उसी टाइम मेरे को कोई ये नहीं था कि मतलब अभी कोई घर पे आ जाएगा या कोई बात हो जाएगी, कुछ हो जाएगा, मतलब मेरे को इस चीज़ का कोई मतलब वो ही नहीं था, मतलब पता ही नहीं। उसके बाद फिर मैंने उसको ऊपर बाथरूम में लेके चला गया। ऊपर बाथरूम में ले जा करके नीचे आया किचन में, और नीचे किचन में से आकर के चाकू लेके गया और इसको मैंने उसी टाइम तुरंत काट करके और इसका मैंने बाजू और ये सीने का एक पीस भी खाया था।
अच्छा
हाँ जी, जो मैंने घर में ही मतलब किचन में बनाया था.
It's almost as if he steps out of this person that he's been and begins to see it almost from a third party and explains, well, this is what happened. This little girl that I wanted to have sex with after she was unconscious. I realized that I couldn't, so I thought I'd kill her. Once I did that, I thought I'd take her upstairs and I thought I'd dismember her. And then I thought I'd eat some of her. And he says this in this matter-of-fact way, the way that we would when we were describing something not that we were involved in, but that someone else was involved in.
With such a heinous series of now admitted crimes, the next question for the authorities: was this man sane enough to be charged? Or was he mad?
The psychologist that assessed Koli actually deemed him fit for trial, said that he wasn't unfit, he was able to understand the difference between right and wrong. So this wasn't someone that had lost the ability to engage with his surroundings, the world around him. This was someone that could make decisions. So she was very much saying that this wasn't a psychotic breakdown. This guy was bad, not mad.
At this particular stage, he is more of a psychopath, because here he has committed something and he has no guilt about it. He has killed so many girls, and then he went even to the extent of cooking that flesh and cutting them and serving it to others and having himself. So this is purely a psychopath without guilt that he has done it. So in that respect, definitely he is an abnormal person.
The sexual urge in him probably forced him to get into that kind of activity, and the fear of getting caught later on because of the act that he did on the children, he killed them. And he found that drains are the safest place to dispose of the skulls and the body. So that's how it all happened. This is the version that we gathered and from the people who were close to Surinder Koli.
Surinder Koli confessed to the murder of 19 children and young women. His 2-year reign of serial killing had gone undetected because largely it had gone uninvestigated.
India has found that this case raises some tough questions. Is there one law for the rich, another for the poor? Is the shift from the rural India to the modern India one that could traumatize others, and could other monsters like Koli be created in the process?
Koli was at first sentenced to death. He was placed on remand as appeals about sentence were heard. Certainly this was a case shocking, even by some of the standards of the horrific crimes of recent Indian history. Surinder Koli appalled all who came across him.
Journalists are also human beings, and no matter how much we are involved in reporting facts, but we cannot keep our emotion aside all the time. And this is a case in which small kids were involved, and the place itself was so disturbing for us. Victims crying, mother crying, taking the photograph everywhere, searching for the children. The first day was really very disturbing, to the extent that it was probably for the first time that tears were there in my eyes while reporting. And I could feel the pain of parents who were in search of their child. They didn't know whether the child has been killed or alive. They just wanted to know where the child is.
In 2014, a series of court hearings considered commuting Koli's sentence to life. At one stage, it seemed he would be hanged. The Indian president refused a petition for mercy. But in January of 2015, the sentence was commuted. The judge felt that Koli had been waiting too long to discover his fate. He would be kept behind bars, but his life would be spared.
He will never be released. Life means life.
Surinder Koli really is as bad as it gets, but what purpose would be served by another death?
The Lal family is still laundering the linen of rich people who live and work in the same neighbourhood, but who represent an India that the Dalit or untouchables are not part of. The 2015 confirmation of Surinder Koli's sentence may bring to an end the case of a cannibal who preyed on those who lived in the slums, but it will not bring to an end the enormous disparity in wealth, culture, and moral values which exist in the world's second largest country.
We always want to try and find that one thing, what caused it, what happened in his biochemistry, in his childhood, in his surroundings. I think in this case, it was a perfect storm. This man must have been born with a predilection to enjoying pain, to enjoying inflicting pain. He must have been able to develop a sense of entitlement over how he treated human beings, a certain contempt for human beings, probably nurtured by the way that he saw, his boss, which he idolized, working on them, and then also the right social surroundings. He was able to go away and be quiet in this small village. So all of these things work together. So we don't have one reason why this happened, but a lot of very small things that led to a very, very terrible series of events.